Okay, I think we're live. Does yours say live?
Yeah.
Okay, so I am Haley Har.
Alicia Conley.
Perfect. Okay,
Here we go.
here we go. So, first question: what doctrine in Wilbur's heart drove him to advocate? And why is the doctrine of the family important to have in your heart to be passionate and persistent?
So I wrote that the doctrine in his heart was that all men are created equal. And I also realized during the movie, like he didn't just care for people, he cared for his animals too. Like I feel like he just had a soft spot in his heart for all of God's creatures.
Yeah, I thought that was really neat too. I thought it was interesting it because I had went back and started watching the beginning of the movie to remember some parts. And I hadn't noticed before, but at the horse at the beginning, he's like, treat your horse nice or whatever. So
Hmm.
I thought that that was a good kind of foreshadowing of how he would act towards people for the rest of the
Hmm.
movie, that
Hmm.
he really does care about all of God's. And that's what I put too, is that the equality of men was a big time. I also put that he just kind of was against slavery. I think it was something he kind of fighted, but it was also a doctrine that he believed in, going along with equality of men. But he didn't really believe, I mean, he didn't have a slave. He didn't believe in slavery. He didn't think that it was something that should be happening. I just don't know that he quite had the passion at the beginning to really fight against it. So that was kind of neat to watch him throughout the movie go for that.
Yeah. I got the impression at the beginning that he had found faith again and that he was kind of trying to make a decision between being like a monk or something, like his former
Yeah.
preacher, or remaining in his career, because then his friend brings all those people over and the woman says to him, "We think you can do both. You can be a man of God and you can advocate." And I thought that I liked that part,
I liked
that
that
he
part
didn't
too.
have to choose between the two. Um,
Yeah, I agree. That was a really good scene too. I wrote about that scene quite a bit in this paper
yeah,
because I thought that was really powerful and kind of a turning point for him.
there were things I wrote about over and over. I was like, I can't think of anything else that fits this.
Well, there were
Um,
certain scenes and lines that were so powerful. I was like, this fits with
mhm,
everything.
mhm. So as far as doctrine of the family, I um I wrote a bunch, but I feel like it has to be deep in our hearts for us to stick with the cause. Like I felt like Wilbur's um, absolute conviction that slavery was wrong and that all men were created equal is what kept him going because it wasn't an easy fight. And I think that we have to be the same way in the doctrine of the family. Like we have to absolutely believe in it and know it's true.
Yeah, that was something that I wrote over and over. That was one of the things, but I definitely put that here too, that we have to have it in our hearts and we have to know it, because if we don't have enough passionate, then we're just going to be overrun by those that are against it because they have their passions and they have their arguments and they feel just as strongly about their point of view, and they want to fight against those that are for it. So with
Mhm.
both Wilbur and the doctrine of the family, I thought it was neat how closely slavery the issue of slavery seemed to be with our issues of the family today. And so it was kind of fun to think about, or neat to think about, how we can be, as long as we research and we know enough about the doctrine of the family, we can stand up just as strongly as Wilbur did, even if we're not a seat in government, whatever.
Mhm. Yeah. I just had a thought when you were saying um, that this anti-slavery fight is a good analogy because the people that were for slavery felt like they needed slavery for the country to progress.
Mm-hmm.
Like they didn't want to give it up because they felt like it would take them backwards. And I think there are a lot of people that think that um, the changes that have come to the family are a good thing. Like that it gives them more freedom and they view it as a progression of society that people don't have to be married anymore and things like that. And I don't know. I just thought
Mm.
that that is a good analogy, you know,
That's really
that the
interesting.
other
Mm.
side thinks there are really good things about it.
And they sincerely think that, like, they really do
Mhm,
think, and that's true, I didn't think about it that way, but that they totally think that our society is progressing because of the way that the family is going, but
mhm.
it's not. It's not progressing, and slavery
Yeah.
wasn't progressing either.
No.
And I hope I'm not biased in my thinking. I think I am biased in my thinking, um,
Mhm,
because I know that they think, just as strongly about their side, like I said, but yeah, that's an interesting thought.
mhm.
Awesome.
I think you see the evidence of truth, you know? I think I don't you just look at somebody that chooses not to get married or they've been divorced several times, and I think at the end of their life, when you compare that to someone that was married and had a family, and the contentment that they find in life is really different, I think,
Mhm.
than someone that hasn't had a family.
I am totally blanking out if this was in this movie or in another class, but there was a line in it that said happiness is in marriage and you're happy when you're married. I
Mhm.
think it might have been from something else unless it was this movie,
I
but
It was this movie. It was
was it the
towards
movie?
the beginning, and his
Okay.
cousin is taking it's like when they set the 2 up, like
Oh,
Wilbur
that's right.
meets
Okay, yeah.
yeah, and they're walking in, and he's talking about, yeah, that marriage and happiness go together,
Yeah,
which
so
I
I
loved.
loved that. Okay, good. I'm glad it was this movie. So many
Well, and
final
I think
things
he
in
was
my
talking
head.
about health that, because Wilbur is sick,
Oh,
and
yeah.
he's like, "You need to get married because 'cause you'll be
You'll be
healthy."
healthy.
Yeah. I
Oh,
loved
yeah.
that part, that whole setup part. It was
I
so
know, that was so funny.
obvious.
That's so funny.
Um,
But yeah, okay, good. That does
okay.
relate. So I just think that it's true that marriages, I think they're right, and people are healthier. It has been proven that people are healthier when they're married and
Mhm,
when they have a family. So
mhm. Yeah,
that was funny. That was a funny
yeah,
scene.
I loved it. Um, on that, just one last comment on that last one, but I put that we have to understand the doctrine to be able to live it.
Mm.
And I remembered what Ryan Anderson said in those last 2 chapters of his book about the best way that we advocate for a family is by living it, you know? And so it's easier to live if you understand the doctrine.
Yeah, I like that. That's true. I mean, we can't live it if we don't understand it.
Mhm.
Awesome. Okay, well, anything else on that one? I think that was about everything I
Not
had
for
put as
me.
well. Okay. Well, I can start with the second one.
Okay.
How did Wilbur employ a theoretical approach? Oh, this one was really insightful. So, looking at the different
This was
levels.
the hardest one for me. I was like, I'm not even sure I understand all these different levels, but I
Well, I
tried.
don't think I understand the levels either, but I also thought that they totally related. And especially looking at the individual level and then the chrono system, I thought that we kind of talked about this in the last question, but the individual level is was Wilbur kind of conflicting at the beginning about what exactly he was going to do, and he needed to know that he had a passion for slavery, and I think he did, but he just kind of had to come to that realization by talking to people and by realizing that there were others around him, which goes into the microsystem, but others around him that would support him. And then I love the microsystem that had um, I put down his girlfriend. I think her name was Barbara. Is that right? That
Yeah,
she
I think so.
That's what I hope I found. But that Barbara was supporting to him and that she was willing to like go along with everything as well as his best friend and some of the other people. And then to skip ahead to the chrono system, I just thought it was neat to think about how the timetable was just right. Even though it was here in America, slavery was just getting started. In Britain, that was the time for them to abolish slavery. And so it was neat that Wilbur was able to hit at a time when the hearts of the men were softened enough that they could pass the bill. So those are kind of my main thoughts.
Yeah. Well, and I actually felt like over time, like I felt like hearts were softer towards the beginning, and then they are threatened by the wars going on in other parts of the world,
That's true.
and everybody gets really worried about that, you know, and they think he's horrible for even trying to fight that battle when war is imminent, you know. But
That's
then
true.
when that threat of war lessens again, then that's when it's finally passed and like the people are ready to think about it. And so I thought that was courageous of him to stick with the fight all through those different changes.
Yeah, very persistent.
Yeah. Um and I also mentioned his wife. I put that she was his wife, but um it reminded me of A Sacred Duty and how Richard Wilkins would
Yeah.
call his wife, you know, and she would support him because I felt like towards the end of the movie, he is ready to give up. And she's the one that says, it's not over. You know, day comes
Yes.
after the night and you need to keep going.
Yes. Oh, that's a good connection between the two because that was fun to see, especially that dramatic night when he's like really sick and
Hmm.
I mean, they're talking about their unborn baby, but she kind of gives him a will to live even
Hmm.
when he feels almost defeated. I think not only by the sickness, but by everything else going on around. And so I loved
Hmm.
her willingness to continue to support him and give
Hmm.
him the will to live.
Hmm. Yeah.
Another one I wrote about was the macro system,
Hmm.
which I said was probably the hardest one to fight. I think that was the one that is like the beliefs and ideologies of culture. And so to fight the cultural beliefs of that time where everyone just thought that slaves weren't people or black people weren't people and that it was okay to treat them the way they did. That's a hard thing to fight against culture. And it's hard to
Yeah.
fight against our cultural beliefs today too.
Right. Yeah. That's exactly what I put, that the culture was pro slavery. But like for one way that he tried to work against them, like change the macro system, the scene that I kept writing about over and over was when there's the boating party
Mhm.
and they take him right next to the slave ship and he's like, no, don't cover your noses, you need to smell this, you know. And I just think that the whole point of that was to change the attitude about slavery and help people recognize that they're people too, you know. And kind of gross, but somewhere in here I wrote something about it doesn't, you know, whether you're black or white or slave or free, death smells the same, you know. And you know, I think that was probably a turning point for a lot of those people to be brought that, like, it's okay to accept something when you don't have to see it. You know what I mean? But when you have to accept the reality of it, then you tend to change your mind.
Yeah, for sure. That I wrote about that scene over and over again too. That was a really
Yeah,
powerful one.
gross, but
Gross. But it hit him. It worked. Like
right,
it
right. Like
was
this is what's really happening, you know.
yeah.
And when you are pro slavery, you're promoting this. So,
Yeah.
ugh.
Kind of a burn on them like this is what you're
Yeah,
doing.
yeah, really. Um, so for the exosystem, I'm that's where I'm really not sure, but I wrote about relationships that he has, like his relationships that expand over the part of the movie. And there's the one man, Charles Fox,
Mhm.
that has been on the opposing side and he switches. And I feel like um, his presence and his alliance just does a lot for the fight against slavery. And so I don't know exactly if that's exosystem, but
That's
I
who I
think it
put.
is because it's kind of between the culture and what Wilbur is working for. So,
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I thought too, and that's who I put as well because I felt like as the movie went on, and then that scene where he finally like respects Wilbur and his kind of turns towards the
mhm,
abolitionists. Um, I
Mhm.
wrote down, I also put the Duke of Clarence, the main bad guy, the little
Mhm.
short one. Even though he's
Mhm.
against Wilbur, I felt like he was a big influential part in everything because, that part where he's like, go fetch my slave. And
Mhm.
he kind of,
Yeah.
I felt like he played a big part and he made Wilbur mad. And so because he made Wilbur so mad, it kind of helped um, aggravate his passion about it. So that was
Mhm.
another one that I kind of thought about. But I wrote about both of them. I did Charles Fox and then.
Like it drove him to action.
Hmm.
Yeah. I didn't write about him. That's a good one. I wrote about James Stephen too. I had to look up his name on the transcript, but he's the lawyer that comes back at the end and he's like, I have an idea. And
Mm,
that's when they passed the law about the flags, which I'm not
okay.
sure I quite understand what it was, but I just like he had a huge influence on crippling the slave trade, and it's because he had gone out um, to the West Indies and seen it in action, and I
Hmm.
think that helped him have the idea of changing the laws about protecting certain flags and stuff. And so I put
Yeah,
him as part of the
I didn't
exosystem.
I didn't quite
It's
understand that
interesting.
either, but I think that's a good example
Yeah.
too.
And it's interesting because his name is actually throughout the movie, but I didn't catch it. And so then when he shows up, I'm like, who is he? Am I supposed to know who he is? But it's kind of like he's just mentioned earlier in the movie and not really there. Anyway,
I feel like it was such a deep movie. I need to go back and watch it again now that I've had time to think about it because
I know. I
there's
think I
a
could watch it 5 times easily.
lot. But
Mm.
I like what you were saying about how, just drew a blank, how men are, I just totally blanked out. I'm sorry.
That's
You were
okay.
saying about his name's James Stevens, right?
Yeah,
The flags, and he was an activist. No, he was the
he was
lawyer.
a lawyer. Uh-huh.
I'll
So I feel
remember.
like he knew his way around the laws. You know what I mean? Like
Oh,
the
I
focus
remember.
had totally been on abolishing the slave trade, but
And
he
he brought
figured
him
out a
back.
way to cripple it that no one would suspect.
Yeah, and I liked what you said. I was gonna say that I liked what you said about how he had seen it firsthand, and that was almost what influenced him. And I just thought this is kind of a side note, but I think it's interesting that again with the smelling of the boat, just kind of those that see it firsthand, that's really what hits them. And I feel like almost Wilbur was trying to find ways to see it firsthand throughout the movie, or he did, like in that meeting at the beginning with the men when he's in the house and they like show him the cuffs and the neck thing and then the scar on the slave's
Mhm.
chest. I feel like that's a big hitting moment where he sees it firsthand as well, and he's like, there's something that needs to be done about this, and this is not the
Right.
way people should be treated. So it's just interesting that though we wish we could just tell people, it's almost, well, it's more influential when they're able to experience it.
Mhm.
So anyway,
Yeah.
side note.
Yeah. And then like I wrote about the card game in the microsystem because I think it demonstrated Wilbur's integrity, which I write about later too. Um, but I just feel like in his circle of influence, like people knew where he stood.
Mhm.
And I think that the Duke of Clarence knew where he stood as well when he called for his slave. I think that was kind of a ploy. And I just think the fact that he was willing to leave everything he had put on the table and walk away because the slave had been brought into the bargain shows like how deeply he felt his conviction.
Yeah. I like that example. I didn't think about that one for that, but I think that's a good one of the card and showing his integrity because people did know where he stood. But that kind of takes it back to an individual level where he had to know where he stood and he had to be sure and be bold, and he had shown that to some of his friends and people before, like the Duke of Clarence knew that. I think so too.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah. Do you have anything you want to add? I
just,
have a mezzo section too, but
yeah, I
I
wasn't.
feel like we're on this one forever.
Yeah, we could move on to the next one. I feel like that one was kind of a mix between the micro and the exosystem that
Mm-hmm.
we talked
Yeah,
about.
I
But
just mentioned people that influenced him,
yeah,
like he realized he wasn't alone.
which was huge. That was a big part of
Mm-hmm.
what he needed. But yeah, we can go on to question 3.
Okay. So, how did Wilbur and his fellow advocates do and share their research, and what evidence did they provide to persuade those opposing or on the fence? And so, when I went back and looked at the transcripts, because I don't catch every word of a movie,
Nobody does.
so there was a part where it talked about some men that went to like all the different port cities, and they had talked to like the men that worked on the slave ships, and they had talked to doctors who cared for the slaves, and so they went out and did that research just within England and brought that back. And then there was um, James, I already forgot his last name, James Stephen, that actually went to the West Indies and saw what was going on there. And so I feel like Wilbur was always in the same place, but he had team members that went out and saw it for their own eyes.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, that it wasn't just him that was seeing things, but it was a lot of James Stevens was a big one
Mm-hmm.
of those. This one I also mainly wrote, this is the main one where I wrote about the scene of the Madagascar, that ship that we brought up earlier, that they smelt, because I felt like that was a really good way to like prove their research.
Mm-hmm.
It was a simple way to show them like, look, this is what we know and this is what you're doing, and this is how we're going to persuade you that what you're doing is wrong.
Right.
I felt like that was.
I wrote the same thing. And I wrote about Thomas Clarkson and how he had the shackles to show people.
Mm-hmm.
And Equiano, the slave, it says that he wrote a book and it sold 50,000 copies in 2 months, I think, which I thought was amazing because I think it goes to show how many people were not prejudiced. Like, if you were prejudiced against him, I think you wouldn't buy his book. You know what I mean?
And that's a ton of people.
Obviously, there were a lot of people that wanted to know his experience.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's cool. Did he say that in the movie, the 50,000 or whatever?
Mm-hmm. I think so.
I
I
thought I
think it's
remembered
part
hearing the
of
number.
the night that he spends talking. He talks to Barbara all night, and it's kind of like a flashback. And I think it's in that part of the movie.
Okay. Yeah, I remember them talking about the book, that it like sold really fast into a lot of people. So yeah, that was cool. That's a good one. I didn't write about that one, but that's a good one.
That's okay. You've had good ones that I didn't write about either. So.
This is why I wish I could expand. That's okay. What are some other ones I wrote? Oh, I wrote when he sang Amazing Grace. I thought that was a good one. In front of the people, because they were singing some song and he walks in and he's like, I have a better song to sing for you. And then it's like talking about God and his grace. And I had seen a movie, I can't remember what it's called, but I had recently seen one about slavery where the slave was singing the song Amazing Grace. And as I was watching him sing, I kind of like flashed back to that. And it was just really neat to think about slavery with that song. I've never really associated it because I just haven't, I didn't know where the song came from or whatever. But I think the message in the song of these slaves that need the grace of God literally because they're being worked to death just really touched me. So I liked that a lot too.
I
Uh-oh.
don't know if you Wilbur's
You're
preacher
cutting
wrote this
out.
song. Oh, am I
One
back?
more time. Start over. You're back.
So Wilbur's preacher is the one that wrote the song. Did you catch that?
Yeah, I did see that. Is that in real life? Who wrote it?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think so. And he was a former slave trader. And so
Good shit.
really it's that he feels so wretched because of what he's done, and that he's amazed that the grace of the Savior can save him even after being involved in that. But yeah, I think it did become a theme song for just anti-slavery in general, for the slaves and everyone that was against it.
Oh, thanks for
But
bringing that up about the preacher, though. I didn't think about it from his perspective because he was the one that wrote it. I was gonna look up, I didn't, but I was gonna look up if he was actually the one. But yeah, that must have
oh,
meant a lot to him.
yeah, I think that's a true story.
And that makes the
And
scene where he's so passionate about it too more meaningful too.
when he finally comes forward and is willing to share his story.
Yeah, and he's like, do it. Like, you need to, this is
Mm,
wrong. And I have the blood of these slaves on my hands or
yeah.
whatever.
Yeah, he talks about the 20,000 ghosts
Yeah.
that are haunting him. Anyway. Ugh.
Ugh.
He made a good choice.
Yeah, he did.
Do you have anything else on that one?
I was trying to look really quick. Holy cow, this is going really fast. I just looked at the time.
Oh.
I think that was basically it. I had the Charles Fox one where he was like, I'm gonna go look up the word integrity, and kind of when he shows his willingness to be with Wilbur. I thought that was one that related as well because it's kind of showing the men that are against it. Like there are men going for it. There's also the scene I didn't write about, but that kind of reminded me of the scene where I don't even remember the man, but he goes up and like signs the paper. And I'm guessing he was really influential. I need to look up who that was, but
Oh, the petition?
yeah, the
When they roll
petition.
it out on the floor?
Hmm.
I think it is Charles Fox
Was that
that
Charles Fox
signs it.
too?
Yeah, in front of
Okay.
everyone in Parliament,
Okay.
I think.
Yeah, I'll have to look that up, but I'm pretty sure I thought that was him. Anyways, when he signs it, that was like a big boom to everyone too. I think of
Mhm.
the research that there were a lot of people against it. So
Yeah. Yeah, if you need to be done by 1, we better get going.
okay, number 4.
Okay. Do you wanna read it?
Yeah, how does film portray the importance of working together as a group? Oh, I loved this one because I loved our group
Me
this
too.
semester. Seriously, like,
Ew.
oh my goodness, I've really appreciated everyone's inputs and everyone's insights, and I felt like the supporters of Wilbur's, I kind of took a bullet to write about each of with his wife and his best friend and then the preacher. I felt like his main support group,
Mhm.
that they were kind of like you guys and my HOA group that supported me. And to know, just to know that people care and that people are there to stand up with you, I think is
Mhm.
a really important point, and that it's comforting that you're not alone. So that's
Yeah.
the main gist of what I wrote.
Yeah. I mainly put that he gathered strength and encouragement from the people around him, like when he is ready to give up, it's his wife that says, "Oh, you can't give up."
Mhm.
And I think when we work in a group, there's always somebody that can lift the others, like we could take turns being down. Yeah. And I actually went through and I wrote all of your names and
Oh.
something I learned.
Oh.
Oh, I loved our group. That was the best experience
That was so
I've
good.
had in school. Anyway,
Well, and
it
I
was
feel like
so
a
good.
group too, I wrote a little bit about how it gives new insights because everyone has different perspectives and we're all at different points in life. And so it was neat to hear the perspective of Sherry versus you versus,
Mhm,
Kim, who everyone's just kind of doing different things. And Wanda always had something to say. So I just
mhm.
really appreciated those different
Yeah,
perspectives. And I think Wilbur did too with his friends.
mhm. About you, I said she taught me to be more courageous on social media because I
Aw.
felt like you were the one that was always, like, posting real doctrine, and I thought, "Oh my goodness, she's so brave."
I became more brave through this class. I was not that way if you look back at my first post. But you guys encouraged me and
Well,
supported me to be more
yeah.
brave. You're sweet though.
And I feel like I got a little more brave, but I I just think you were the bravest. Anyway, so I think that's awesome.
You're sweet. Thank you.
Mhm.
I think you're brave to go to law school. That's something that I
Oh,
am not
yeah.
courageous enough to do. So.
Yeah, I'm a little lacking in courage. I'm trying to make the decision on which school to go to, like, by Saturday, and I'm having a hard time. Yeah, and there's part of me that's just like, "What are you doing?" Like,
That's huge,
this is getting
Alicia.
too real, and what are you doing?
'Cause your family will move where you go, right?
Yeah, yeah, and my best offers are in Nebraska and Kansas, and so we're trying to figure out where to go.
That's huge. That's a hard decision. I
Mhm.
know. We've been
Yeah.
trying to make that decision too. It's
Oh,
hard.
yeah.
We're
It
gonna put it
is.
off another year actually because
Are
of
you?
yeah, but
Mhm.
it's a big decision. It's really hard.
Yeah.
Oh, good luck.
Yeah, thanks. Are you ready to go on?
Yeah.
Okay. So, what parallels do you see between Wilbur and Captain Moroni? And what is a Christian and professional family advocate? And how did Wilbur exemplify that? And how can you be effective and Christ like against such loud and often degrading voices? So, I put for the parallels, I put that each man had a cause worth fighting for, that each man was a true believer of Jesus Christ, that each of them gathered followers that were true to their cause. And I also put that I think both of them made covenants. Like in the Book of Mormon, we specifically know that Moroni made covenants, but um, I I just feel like Wilbur had his own calling from God. And I put a quote from the movie that said, "I was chosen for this task and I failed. Some part of me does not accept the idea that I've given up." And so, even at his very, very lowest point, like he couldn't completely give it up. And I think that's because he knew that it was something he'd been called to do by God.
That was a touching scene too, where he's like in bed and he's like, I can't.
Mhm.
Yes, I can. I have to. I've been called of God.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. I wrote very similar things with the parallels with Moroni. I went back and read chapter 46 just to remind myself of exactly what about Moroni I was talking about. And when I read about the title of liberty and when he said, in memory of our God, our religion, our freedom, our peace, and our wives and our children, I was like, that's almost what Wilbur said over and over again. I'm doing this for God. I'm doing this for my wife and for my family, and I'm doing this so that we can have freedom and peace and that everyone can have it. And so I think that they were both fighting a war and that we're fighting a war today. It was kind of neat to think about that Moroni was fighting his own personal war and he had conflicts, and then Wilbur had and the conflicts of slavery and now the conflicts of family advocacy. And it's just almost history repeating itself in different ways with different conflicts, and that we as humans just kind of have to figure out how to fight that, and that
Mhm.
there's certain people called um, like Wilbur and like Captain Moroni to stand up to that and to really be a voice for that. So I wrote a little bit about that.
Yeah. That reminds me of uh, the conference that me and Sherry went to, because the main speaker talked about how everyone has a moral challenge in their lifetime. And I while I was doing this, I just thought it doesn't really matter when you live. Like there's always something,
Moral challenge.
yeah, there's always something that needs to be fought against, you know.
Which makes it sound like our day really isn't the worst day, you know. It's been bad before too. We
Yeah,
think we're in
yeah.
the worst times ever, but it was the
Yeah,
worst times ever 10 years
there's
ago and
there's
20 and
always been evil, you know, and there have always
Mhm.
been people that stood up against it. So that's our moral challenge, is whether or not we will stand up for what we believe is right.
and I hope this isn't sacrilegious, but if I were God, I'd be probably kind of tired of seeing people struggle over and over again, you know? Like, come on, just figure it out.
Can't this right. Yeah,
But I guess we all have
I
to do
know.
that, and you're right, we all have to go through that. It's just kind of part of life of figuring out the moral challenges and stuff. So,
Yeah, like we all have to prove ourselves.
yeah,
Yeah.
good thoughts.
So,
Anything else on that one?
well, there's a lot more, but
There's a lot more.
we should probably go on. I just put that a Christian advocate knows and has a testimony of Jesus Christ, and that a professional advocate is educated and like understands how to work in the public sphere. And I think the best advocates know both.
Mhm.
Like they get an education, but they also have a testimony of Jesus Christ. And I think that Wilbur was a good example of that.
I wrote about the scene that you mentioned where the lady says, well, you can be of God and fighting
Hmm.
against this at the same time, because I thought that that was a good example of how we can be doing both, even though it seems impossible. It really isn't. It's actually helpful.
Hmm.
So, and also, like you said, the testimony of Christ, and
Yeah.
to be bold in sharing that.
Yeah. And I remembered the part of the Truth About Marriage where Ryan Anderson is saying Christians need to be experts in their chosen fields,
Mm.
like don't do your professional life halfway because you're a Christian. Like, be educated and be an expert and be faithful. And I think that fits perfectly here. Has nothing to do with the movie, but
No, but with
that's
the
what it
class, I mean, I
reminded
think we
me
were supposed
of.
to connect with the class.
Yeah.
That's really good. I like that a lot.
So, do you
Awesome.
have anything you want to add or do you want to go on?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's lots, but we can go on to the next
Okay.
one. Was it
So,
my turn or your turn?
I'll do it.
Okay.
Marcia Barlow spoke on persuasive speaking and writing. Did Wilbur and others exemplify any of Marcia's ideas, and how so?
Yes.
Oh, this is where I wrote that that slaves or free people all smell the same when they die. That's really gross. But
Oh, gross.
but I just I thought about how Marcia used stories to create a level of like commonality,
Mhm.
like to show that at some point we all believe the same things. And so I felt like that boat scene was kind of like that. Um, like in a way, I think he was demonstrating you might be pro slavery and you might see, maybe financial benefits from slavery, but you can't deny the smell. You can't deny the treatment of these slaves and that they're human, you know. And so I think he brought them to that same kind of level where everyone is human.
Yep, I wrote about that one too. And that kind of reminds me of the scene back where he's showing him the thing around the neck and the handcuffs. I need to know what's the name of the guy that's doing that that shows the
Thomas Clarkson, I think.
Thomas Clarkson. Anyways,
At
Thomas
the
Clarkson.
dinner, is that what you're talking about?
Mhm,
Yeah.
in the house. And he says he's talking to about the fluids. He's like they were in their own poop and stuff. And so
Mhm.
um that just kind of was another thing like the smell where he I mean that wasn't necessarily persuading others. It was kind of persuading Wilbur, I guess.
Mhm.
But he's showing the reality of you can't deny the smell. You can't deny that these people are human. I mean, they have stuff coming out of them that smells
Right.
bad like the rest of us, you
Just like
know?
us. Yeah.
So, I
Yeah.
think
And when you hear those stories, it I think it makes our humanity all the same,
yeah,
and you can't deny that they've been treated horribly.
yeah. Yep, I agree. I also
Okay.
wrote about the Amazing Grace song on this one a little bit. I just said that that was another way that even though Marsha Barlow didn't necessarily say singing, but it was just another way of, like, pulling at those heartstrings of people. So,
Mm. Tugging out
anyways,
emotions. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
Can we go to the next one?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what role did the government policy religious freedom play in the fight of the slave trade? Did you see the political system being pro-family? Why didn't I not answer all the questions? Um, I put that the government was for slavery, and that is why this all happened. I feel like that was kind of an obvious
Mm-hmm.
answer, but um, they used the slaves, as we kind of mentioned, as a way for the culture and also for money and a way of getting power, and so that they could, a lot of the rich people were the ones that had the slaves, and so they kind of used that to their advantage. But then I also talked a little bit about the Catholic Church, and I don't think that it mentioned it a huge amount in the movie, but I know that was a big part of Britain in those days, and that they had that religious background. I think that everyone did have a religious background, and Wilbur used that to his advantage when he talks about God over and over again and how God made us equal. And it wasn't like he was explaining what God was, but he was using the basis that everyone knows who God is and this is what God teaches. And he was kind of expounding on that. And so I just thought a little bit, that was more from my own opinion of what I was watching. I don't know the correct facts on religion back then, but that's kind of what I was thinking about religious freedom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I basically put the same things on government. And for policy, I just put that the policy was that it was legal,
Mm-hmm.
and it talks about at one point, one of them says the slave trade has 300 MPs in its pocket. And so I thought there's a lot of corruption, like there's money being exchanged or whatever to keep that law in place. Um, and then religious freedom, I thought was interesting because I felt like even his friend was mocking his faith at the beginning. Like,
Yeah.
he's like, I got a letter from you, but it wasn't from you. It was from some preacher. And, um, you know, I felt like he was kind of being made fun of it for his beliefs. And then um, toward the end, when they're passing the bill about the flags, someone says something about the Jacobites being in the room. And so they start to realize that something's going on with the anti-slavery movement. And just, I got the impression from that people viewed the anti-slavery advocates as religious zealots, you know. Um, I don't know.
Hmm.
But then
Yeah.
one of them says something about the Jacobites are here, they're up to something. And like the guy in charge is like, we don't need to hear that kind of invective, like move forward and have a more open mind, and kind of puts him in his place. Like he shouldn't be judging other people based on religious beliefs.
Religion.
So, yeah. So I thought that was all kind of interesting.
Yeah, it was. And then for pro family, I thought that they were pro family. We talked about the marriage scene, and I didn't write about it because I didn't realize that was this movie for some reason. But I felt like
Yeah.
throughout, I don't know why I didn't think that, but throughout the movie, it felt like the family was a big thing, and I mean, it showed Wilbur marrying his wife, and that the baby was important, even with everything going on. So I didn't
Mhm.
ever feel like there. Maybe you caught some anti-family, but I felt like they were pretty pro-family.
I felt like the movie was pro family. Um, and the characters we admire were pro family, but I also wrote that um like the political system I don't think was really pro family. And like it just seemed like the men in the parliament weren't married. That's the impression I got. Maybe some of them were, but eh, um and even if they were, like it showed them several times in that club room all hanging out together playing cards or whatever. And it seemed more like if you were in parliament then you were part of the boys club,
Hmm,
you know.
that's
And
a good
Wilbur
point.
didn't get married till really old
Later.
age, and his friend never got married. So
That's
I don't
true.
know. I had mixed feelings about it because overall the movie was definitely pro-family.
And it didn't I mean, it didn't specifically say, like, anti-family in any way. I didn't really feel like there were those types of messages, but I guess when you do look at that
Mhm,
the friend didn't get married and that he was older, he didn't wanna get married even.
mhm.
Those are kinda some messages of anti-family, so oh,
Yeah,
they're so
like a
hidden.
culture of putting career above a family,
Yeah, that's true.
not having time for that.
That's true.
So,
Hey, I'm sorry to have to rush at
next
the
one.
end here. Yeah.
It's okay. So, do you feel that Wilbur used his time on Earth well, and how did you see him showing the elements of consecration that Elder Christofferson spoke of? I put that he definitely used his time well, and I looked up the 5 elements. Did you look up the talk and the 5 elements of consecration?
No, I meant to. I
Oh,
remembered them, but I was running out of time, so I didn't look it up.
that's okay. So they were purity, work, respect for one's physical body, service, and integrity. So, like for integrity, I mentioned the card game again, that he knew what he stood for. The respect for his physical body, like it talks about some drug that he'd been taking over
Opium.
time. Yeah. And but then at the end, like he won't take it. Like
Mhm.
when his wife is pregnant and he's super sick and she wants to give him some and he's like, "No, I can't because I want to be like completely here for my kids." And I thought that took a lot of courage to be living in that kind of pain and to turn away from the drug.
He does
So,
mention opium a lot through it, though. I thought that
yeah.
was kind of an interesting, like, in the middle of the night, he's like, "Well, I'll just use opium to get through it," and he even makes a
They
comment
call
too.
it something else though. What did they I don't remember the name.
It was some other drug,
S
and then I thought he
Yeah.
used opium as a word. He might have had 2 drugs. I was trying to figure that out, if it was, like, a medicine drug, and then I know he used opium because then there was a comment that he made about, like, well, slaves are living a hard life and they don't have drugs to get them through it or whatever.
Mm.
I don't know if you remember
Yeah.
that, but
Oh, yeah.
but that was neat to see at the end that he was willing to give that up even when he was in so much pain.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Do you have anything you wanna add to that? I
I
feel like
mean,
we have to hurry.
I know. I wrote basically the same, that he did a good job, and even though he was sick, he was willing to fight through it and give it all he got. So
Mhm.
that was basically it.
Yeah, and I felt like he looked to God for answers.
Yeah.
Like I felt like he really wanted to be right with God in his work.
Especially that showed when he went to go see the preacher for advice. Like he
Mhm.
did want the approval of God in what he was doing. So,
Mhm.
and throughout the movie, he did show that.
Yeah. Okay, so number 9, any other profound thoughts or personal insights from the movie that are related to child and family advocacy?
The main one I wrote about was when he and his best friend are talking, and his best friend says, "I want to become the prime minister." And
Mhm.
then Wilbur was like, well, you can't do that or whatever. And then the best friend William said, well, we're too young to think that things are impossible, so we should do them anyways.
Mhm.
I loved that. I thought that was so profound. I That really hit me because I was like, things I think things are impossible all the time, but they're not. And when it comes to advocacy and stuff, it feels like it's impossible, but we just need to remember we're too young. Even if we're old, we're too young to think that things are impossible.
Just do it anyway.
Just do it anyways. That was
I
the main
like that
one, but
idea. I wrote a quote from him too that was the principles of Christianity lead to action as well as meditation. And I just
mm,
throw it's not enough to just meditate. We have to take action too.
that's good.
Um, and I also one thing that stood out to me is when everyone's upset about the war and they don't want to hear about the slave trade issue anymore and they're accusing Wilbur of being like anti-government, like almost accusing him of treason because he's bringing it up. He's like, he says the issue of slavery isn't less relevant because there's another issue. It's still horrible. It's still going on. And I just thought there will always be other issues that come up, and things that might try to push the issue of families out of the way, but we need to recognize that other things don't make family less important and that we still need to be fighting for that.
I like that. That's good. Oh man. So many good things. I want to talk about the other
There are
ones,
so
but
many.
we're supposed to talk about 10 and 11 too, right? Those are
Probably.
kind of more
Does it
personal
say to
questions.
go? I know. Does it say to go through all the questions?
I thought it was when I read it, it said go through the questions. Thought it was more like discuss the movie. We can talk for 1 minute. I told my commitment at 1 I'd be a little bit late.
Oh,
Um, just to kind of wrap it up, I just have learned a lot in this class about advocacy, and I thought it was neat to get to look at it with this assignment, even though it was kind of difficult. I think that learning how to research the issues of the world and learning about how they affect me has been really profound, and I'll remember, and I hope I can continue to research them. I wrote a little bit at the end about how I've tried to talk about the issues with my husband as well as, after our group, because I feel like they're important things that we can talk about in preparing to have our family. So I'm just grateful because I know that this class is going to continue to influence me more than maybe any other class, just because it's real issues that are going on and how we can fight against them.
yeah. Yeah, I think for me, like to number 10, I felt like I had a sound doctrinal understanding of family before the term. I did, but I feel like my view has expanded. Like we hear all the time in church that, family life has the potential to make us happy, and we study the proclamation and we know the things that we're supposed to be doing. But I think this class just helped me have a broader view and realize that if anyone lives those principles, then they can have happiness in this life too. And that, like, it helps children thrive in no matter what religion they are. Like, the principles apply to everyone. And so I feel like I don't know, it just opened my mind to a broader view and how family life affects communities and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, I agree that in my family, like it raised my awareness of things that I need to be teaching my kids and stuff like that.
So good. I'm really sad this class is over.
Me too.
It's been
I
so
don't think
good.
I've ever been sad for a class to end.
I'm excited for like the deadlines and assignment part, but like
Right.
I've learned so much. I feel like this class has taught me. When I was doing the course evaluation, I gave it highest marks I've ever given any class because I just feel like I've learned so much in
Mhm.
this class. Really
Yeah.
appreciated it.
And I think this is the only class I've ever taken where I felt like every lesson was applicable and like the material just went together really well.
Yeah.
It wasn't boring. Like I loved it. And I
If
loved
anything,
our
I just
group.
wished I know.
I'm gonna miss our group.
I just wish that I could have spent more time studying if I hadn't had all my other classes, more time studying
Mhm,
each subject because I felt like I wanted to go deeper every week because it was just so
mhm.
good. So,
Yeah, it's been really good. Life-changing experience, honestly.
really.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Alicia. Thanks for changing the
Thank
time
you,
for
Haley.
me. I'm
It's
gonna stop the
okay.
broadcast.